Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevon Odelberg, and you've found your way to Kinda Murdery, a place that means more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories, the unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. Hey everybody, welcome to Kinda Murdery. I'm your host, Zevon Odelberg. Thank you for deciding to be here. I'm not going to waste any time today. We're going to jump right into part 2 of the Murderous Marlyse May. Please notice that this is part 2. So if you haven't heard part 1 yet, go back and listen to it and then rejoin us. But do come right back, because today, once the story is concluded, don't go anywhere. Stick around, because immediately following the story will be my interview with New York Times bestselling author and creator of the Sandman Slim series, a brilliant writer, one of my favorite writers, one of my personal artistic heroes. Again, New York Times bestselling author, so I'm obviously not the only one who likes him, Richard Kadrey. We have an incredible, deep, interesting, moving conversation. He tells his own kind of murdery story. So even though we have a longer show than usual today, I think you're going to really enjoy my conversation with Richard Kadrey. And with that, it's time to make like beloved Eddie Munson and heavy metal, because Kinda Murdery starts now. The first interview obtained from Mrs. May took place during the afternoon of Monday, November 14th. She was still too weak to give more than a brief statement, and what she did give told practically nothing. Andy, she said, came to her apartment at the usual hour of 8 p.m. on November 12th. He had a toothache, she stated, and had been drinking. While seated on the edge of the bed, he put his hand under the pillow and brought out a revolver that she kept there. She said she tried to get possession of her revolver and suddenly felt a stinging pain in her left side. She said she remembered nothing of what happened after that. She told the detectives that she had the revolver for protection, but could not remember where she bought it. In this statement, she escaped the slippery plank of Davolo's shooting himself, and the detectives knew no more than they did before. After she'd rested up a bit, Judge McGeehan and Assistant District Attorney Keir, who makes investigations for the Homicide Department of the District Attorney's Office, visited her with a stenographer. To Judge McGeehan's preliminary greeting and questions regarding the pain at her wound, she made no answers. Only the twitching of her hand, held by a pleasant-faced nurse, showed she was alive. "You had a gun," the district attorney said, suddenly changing his tone from one of sympathy to sharp accusation. "In the house," she evaded cunningly. "I was robbed a year ago. The beasts. They come to the home again last week. Detective tell me to get a gun because I was always alone." "Was Andy good and drunk?" "He was not quite drunk. He smelled of liquor. He brought a bottle of whiskey and put it on his tooth for a toothache. Oh, my little Andy." "Don't cry, Mary," her questioner said soothingly. "Did you fight with him? Tell me about it." "Yes," she said in a weary voice. "Andy said, 'Let's elope,' and I said, 'Don't be foolish.' His parents objected to me because I'm a married woman. They're foolish. Why not me as well as somebody else?" she asked scornfully. Maybe that's a little bit of the stereotypical French morals there, huh? "But I said to him, 'Oh, Andy, there are thousands of girls, but only one mother.' And he said, 'How would you like to die with me?' And then I hear pop, pop, pop. He was a good boy. Why did he do that? He was so sweet." "Did he shoot himself in the head, Mary?" "Oh, yes," she replied readily. "He was shooting all over himself. He said, 'I kill you too.' He went like, I do not know. I went to get up. I couldn't get up. He shoot all the time. I say stop, stop. And then I feel a pain and it all goes black and I wake up here." In her first statement, Mrs. May had skirted on the safe side of an implausible story. In this one, made to the district attorney, she had slipped into a quagmire of lies. Not only was it impossible for Davolo to have shot himself in the head, but, according to Dr. Alexander Ogotler, the city toxicologist, an analysis of the brain and stomach showed that there was absolutely no grain or wood alcohol present in the deceased at the time of the death. Asked if a small quantity rubbed on a tooth or a gum would register in the brain, he gave it as his opinion that it would, as the brain is susceptible to the smallest quantity of alcohol. Judge McGeehan immediately ordered the woman's removal from the public ward to the prison ward, charged with suspicion of homicide. It was there that she made a third statement, insisting that she remembered nothing of the first two and had never before seen Winterhalter, Smith, District Attorney McGeehan, nor Keir. This statement put the shooting in an entirely different light and appeared to vindicate Marlyse. However, this was not given until January 15, 1928, which was exactly 2 months and 2 days after the discovery of the murder. During that time, Marlyse was too ill to be taken before the grand jury, but the evidence against her had been accumulating until it looked as if an indictment was inevitable. One thing that puzzled detectives Winterhalter and Smith from the beginning was the absence of any suicide note. In all their experience with suicide cases, very few human beings, they had found, were either so callous or so friendless as to voluntarily leave of life without leaving a farewell explanatory note. And, in spite of her many faults, no one had ever accused Marlyse May of being callous, and certainly she was not friendless. Smith clung doggedly to the murder and attempted suicide theory, while his colleague believed with the police and district attorney that it was a plain case of murder motivated by jealousy. Smith then was jubilant at the next development. A suicide note was found. The discovery was made one morning after a patrolman on guard had reported that a friend of Marlyse's had attempted to enter the apartment, explaining that the wounded woman had requested her to go there and pack up her clothes. At least that was the reason she gave. The guard naturally refused this request, and she left in an apparently more perturbed state of mind than the refusal of such a simple favor seemed to call for. About this same time, Mrs. Cohn, a sister of the dead youth, applied for permission to take away her brother's belongings. This was granted, and she visited the murder flat in company with detectives Winterhalter and Smith. Dust was thick everywhere. Heavy rain had bespattered the windows, and the cleaner had not been allowed to polish them off. The winter sunlight filtered through the grime and lit up the ghastly mementos of the crime. In picking up the derby hat referred to earlier in the story, Mrs. Cohn disturbed the dainty linen scarf which covered the dressing table. There, under the scarf, overlooked by the detectives and guarded all this time by the simpering painted French doll, she found a scattered heap of scraps of a torn letter. This was carefully pasted together in a complete pattern. It was in Marlyse's handwriting and addressed evidently to her husband. It read as follows: "Please forgive me for what I am gone to do. I know you will hurt, but understand me and forgive me. So I am gone to end all this. I love Andy more than life itself. You understand me, and I hope you will come back and will avenge me, for he is responsible for what's going to happen. I can't stand it any longer, so it's better for me to go. I am tired of living this way. I love Andy, and he told me he loves me too. Please send all my clothes to my mother, and please, sweetheart, because you are still my sweetheart, you're still dear to me. A strange..." Here a part of the letter was missing. "He being but it..." Another part missing. "His family drove me to do what I am going to do. He still owes me some money, $500 or $600. I don't really know what I'm going to do, but please, Adam, sweetheart." She's speaking to her husband here, who, as you'll remember, had gone to France in an attempt to cure his tuberculosis, and whose absence enabled her affair with the young Andy Davolo, now dead. So Adam is the absent husband, Andy is the young lover, and she says, "Adam, sweetheart, don't grieve so much. Life isn't worth the grief. Come back, live with your mama, and be happy, console her. Never tell her about this. Think of me once in a while, and forgive me, darling. I give you my best kisses and love. Always your wife, Mackie May." Here a line was drawn across the page, and under this the letter said, "Give my Cricky to Leon." Cricky being, as was later learned, Marlyse's cat. The deceased's business partner, Joseph Wexler, when questioned about the money mentioned in the letter, told the detectives that Andy had spoken of having received a loan from his sweetheart, but he had no idea that it was for such a large amount. Detective Schnabel had fully corroborated what Marlyse had said about the gangsters who had robbed her. They were, he said, a very tough mob, and their pals were quite capable of taking the most drastic measures to prevent her testifying against young Pete McCarthy, who was being held as a suspect on her charge of having been robbed and criminally assaulted a year before. The police and DA believed that Marlyse was too clever a young woman to expect authorities to accept her preposterous statement. But if she'd wanted to lie merely to protect herself, why had she not accused the gangsters of doing the shooting? An answer to this question was suggested in the defense of the first two of the gang who had been caught and sent up. They stated that the French woman had made their acquaintance in Columbus Circle and had invited them to her home, and that the, quote, assault was the result. What the detectives were seeking in their underworld trials was confirmation of this allegation. Was it possible that in her fear that another liaison may be discovered, that she was shielding someone until she had the opportunity to escape? Wait, are the gangsters implying that she invited them up and they had a threesome? Is that the liaison this is referring to, or are they talking about yet another lover that we haven't heard about yet? Well, let's find out. The reports handed in hinging on this angle of the investigation make interesting reading, but they are too voluminous to cover the short space of this story. I'm sure the official reports of this angle of the investigation make interesting reading. Which brings us back to the morning on which Mrs. May made her third statement in the presence of the detectives and the district attorney, which was taken down by a stenographer. She started off by detailing the robbery and assault of the year before. Then, about a week before the shooting, she said that she found a note under her door when she returned home from work. It was signed by Detective Schnabel and asked her to call him up. "Mr. Schnabel," she went on, "he said, 'Marlyse, I have good news for you.' I said, 'Well, what is it?' He said, 'We've got the third man.' I almost fell over. I said, 'You do? You have him?' He said, 'Well, yes, I have him.' And I said, 'Dear, no.' He said, 'You have to come down and identify him. Can you come Monday?' I said yes, and he asked me about the firearm permit. He said he would have it made right. I told him that 2 nights before someone had tried to break into my home. The bell rang near midnight, and I knew it was not Andy because Andy has a key. I asked, 'Who is it?' And a rough voice said, 'It's a friend of yours.' And I said, 'A friend of mine? Who is it?' And he said, 'Don't be smart. We know you had the other men arrested. If you identify him or testify against him, it's going to cost you something. You will be sorry someday. If you keep your mouth shut, we'll give you money to take a long trip.' I didn't answer. I got scared. I listened and I heard them talk more in the hall. There was more than one. They came twice more with the same threat. I went to court to identify the man, but the case was adjourned. My friend Leon Kemp went with me, and she left me for just one little instant to go use the telephone when a man came up to me and said, 'You're a dirty rat. We'll get you if you identify the man.' The judge told me come next Monday." Gradually working down the night of the crime, the sick woman went on. "Andy came before 8. I was lying down. He came in and said, 'Hello, sweetheart.' And I asked him, 'What's the matter? Why are you so pale?' And he said, 'Oh, I have a toothache.' And then he said to me that I looked sick myself, and I said, 'Oh, I am.' So we went to the parlor, and he rubbed whiskey on the tooth, and I asked him if he had a good time at the party Thursday night, and he said, 'No, not so good. You know, honey, I never enjoy myself when you're not with me.' He told me about 2 Jewish girls at the party. His mother tried to make him like one, he said. 'Andy, dear,' I told him, 'this has to stop. If you fight with your mother over me, you can't see me. You can have 20 sweethearts, but you only have one mother.' And then Andy said, 'No, they can hang themselves,' he said. He told me that he loved me, and only me. Then he sees the letter I've written to my husband, and he reads it, and he tears it up, and he says, 'Aren't you foolish?' He took me in his arms and he kissed me. 'Honey,' he said, 'I love you. Why don't you sell your furniture? We'll go away.' I told him, 'I have a husband. He was my first lover, and he's good to me. I do love you too, but it's different.' We talked for a little while, and then I went into the bedroom, and he speaks of the gun, and I tell him I kept it under my pillow. 'It might go off,' he said. 'That could not be,' I said. 'It has the safety on.' But he takes it, and he puts it on the buffet. The light is out. Suddenly I hear a noise. I think at first it is Cricky, my cat, and then I see a shadow. I scream and I say to Andy, 'Honey, somebody's in the room. Quick, get the gun off the bureau.' He runs to the shadow. They fight. I do not know what is happening. There's a bang. I run between them, for I do not know who has the gun and whose hand it is. Somebody threw me down near the door. When I woke up, I was in Fordham Hospital." All right, so this is really interesting, right? Because when Marlyse was originally allegedly in a coma, she kept screaming in her delirium about, "Please, Andy, don't shoot me." So her delirium, or at least apparent delirium, implied that Andy had tried to kill her. Now she's giving an allegedly clear-headed account of events based on memory, where there was a third person who attacked Andy. So the story has changed a lot since she was delirious. One might think that delirium would lead to truth, but who knows? Oh, and here we go. Marlyse denied that she'd ever called out, "Andy, don't shoot me," claiming she had a vague recollection of begging the intruder, "Don't shoot my Andy." Before this statement was taken down for her to sign, the district attorney had bombarded her with questions, one fired hot upon the other. Her stories, as I just mentioned, veered about like a weather vane. If this was to be her defense, it could be punctured easily enough. What the two, Marlyse and Andy, actually discussed on the fatal evening, only she could tell, since the lips of the other were sealed by death. However, in the first place, we had the word of Dr. Gottler that there was absolutely no alcohol present in the brain of the dead man. So the oft-repeated story of an alcohol cure for a toothache was a fabrication in the face of scientific evidence. Secondly, Marlyse referred to the party that Andy had attended in a way that would make it seem as if it were the first time they had discussed it, whereas the police had business partner Wexler's word for it that they had in fact quarreled violently over it the day before. As a result of that quarrel, in fact, she had flashed a gun. Third, Marlyse tried to make it appear that she was the one who was trying to break off the liaison, whereas the police had statements from 4 reliable sources that Andy was planning to leave her, and that she was madly jealous. Fourth, it was mighty improbable that a gangster would visit her apartment, unarmed, and depend upon finding a weapon in the apartment. Fifth, since Andy had himself, according to her own statement, placed the gun on the dresser, there was no need to tell him where it was. Sixth, while the manner in which the gunshot wounds were scattered about the upper part of the dead boy's torso and head did suggest a struggle in the dark, the location of the empty shells proved that he was reclining on the bed when shot. Also, it was likely that if Andy was the one who had torn up the letter, he would then hide the pieces. After the district attorney had thoroughly digested all of this, he came to the conclusion that Marlyse May was far too bright to imagine for a moment that any of these statements would be believed. Her cunning was shown in the clumsy lies woven in and out of the provable facts. The DA was convinced that all of these stories had been concocted and thought out carefully while she was planning the crime, working herself into a fury of rage on the night Andy didn't show up. Mental confusions are common in cases of shock. As a war nurse, Mrs. May had come into contact with many shell-shocked soldiers and was familiar with the incredible accounts they give of the most ordinary happenings. Her scheme was, it seemed, to offer so many contradictory explanations of what took place in apartment 65 on the night of the murder that a very reasonable doubt would be aroused in the minds of the jury as to whether or not the police had properly investigated every lead she gave them. The DA's ultimate conclusion was as follows. Andy DeVolo's doom had been sealed the moment he became friendly with Marlyse May. All during their association, death lurked nearby. On the night he attended the party against her wishes, his sentence was pronounced. The complaints made at the station house were part of her plan. The 3 young gangsters afforded her an excellent opportunity to create imaginary threatening pals. No one ever heard those threats but herself, though they were shouted through the locked door from a public hall and in a crowded courtroom. The pistol she said Andy had urged her to buy for protection was purchased a couple of days before the murder. While there was no one to corroborate these statements, there was on the other hand no one to deny them. Although she claimed that the, quote, shadow crept in through the open window, yet none of the neighbors had heard the full assault of shots. Still, with all this overwhelming mass of circumstantial evidence against her, she might yet beat the case. Much depended on her own attitude. Her own bullet wound was, true enough, a very serious one, but it had, the DA believed, been planted carefully. He did not believe in the murder and attempted suicide theory, which would have had much influence in swaying the jury in the defendant's favor. Had the woman really intended to kill herself, she would not have staged the gangster shooting death scene so craftily. One point that puzzled law enforcement was how, if she were guilty, she had managed to suppress her guilt all throughout her delirium, the genuineness of which no one could question. A celebrated alienist, which is an old-timey word for a psychiatrist, explained. His answer was that if Marlyse had lived for some time with the idea of killing Andy rather than losing him to another woman, her subconscious mind would react so strongly to the story she had prepared that it would act out her plan without requiring aid from her conscious mind. Consequently, even in her delirium, she would be capable of guarding her tongue from betraying her guilt. All of this the DA believed to be true, but belief is not proof. The evidence was sufficient, however, to convince the grand jury, and Marlyse May was indicted for murder in the first degree and charged with killing her lover, Andrew DeVolo. As time went on, Marlyse became a great favorite in the hospital. She showed herself to be sweet and tractable, and when she was able to sit up, she spent her time in making flowers to brighten up the place and in sewing odds and ends for the patients and nurses. An indictment is a million miles away from conviction, and if she exhibited this same sweet philanthropic attitude in court, the DA would have a mighty hard time in proving the tigerish nature that he believed slumbered beneath her fair and gentle exterior. What would be required to convict Marlyse, above all things, was the jury to have sympathy, not for her, but for the victim, Andrew DeVolo. The DA was determined to achieve this. Before the trial started, he had a waxen effigy made of the dead youth, clad only in bright green socks and the yellow shoes he'd been wearing at the time of his death. It was a gruesome figure. Crayon marks on it in green, red, and black showed the entrance, course, and exit of the bullets that had been fired into the body. This would be exhibited in the court. The trial opened on November 30th, 1928, more than a year after the crime, before Judge Albert Cohn in the Bronx County Court. Mrs. Marlyse May was brought into court sitting in an invalid's wheelchair. She was a pathetic figure, coughing almost continually and collapsing every now and again into the waiting arms of a police matron. She would have held all the honors by the end of the first act, or rather the first day of the trial, had it not been for her damning pride and ungovernable temper. Speaking to reporters who gathered around with pencils ready to pick up the sob stories, she said snappily, "I am fighting for my life. I am an American citizen because I married an American man, but I am not an American woman. I am a French girl, and I do not want sympathy. I want justice." Naturally, that statement brought no applause. And as soon as he saw her claws come out, the DA congratulated himself that the defendant would be his best, although certainly involuntary, ally. Her defense counsel, in contending that Marlyse had been shot and had not shot herself, made much of the fact that she had become paralyzed as a result of her wound. The DA claimed and honestly believed that the paralysis was faked, as much as her stories had been. In rebuttal, Mrs. May's attorneys placed a psychiatrist and a neurologist on the witness stand who explained the various tests to which the defendant had submitted. Here are quotations from that testimony. The question put was, "Doctor, when you try to find out if a person is malingering, that's a fancy word for faking or exaggerating an injury, what tests do you put the patients through to ascertain whether or not they may be malingering?" "A person," answered the doctor, "that malingers will not like to be tested too often. They will avoid a test. They usually like to put their fake through, their bluff through the simulation without being tested too much. They are consciously faking. It is a conscious mind and they feel the pain and therefore they do not like the examination. Whereas a hysterical person is not consciously feeling the pain. It is entirely a subconscious association of their thoughts and they like to be tested. I should not say enjoy, but they do not mind being tested." Asked for the results of the test on Marlyse, the doctor said, "I tested the defendant for sensation by the pulling of her skin, and on the right there was a complete loss of feeling, a complete anesthesia, and also half of the body, including the face and tongue. And also on the left side, above the waist, above the leg, including the face, the tongue, and the eye. The eye is the most sensitive test. I put cotton there. I pulled down the eyelash and I rubbed the eyeball with a piece of cotton. In a normal person, the eye would close. That is the strongest reflex in the body, and there was no reflex. Then I stuck a needle in her eye. There was no response." Good God, they stuck a needle in her eye? Sorry, that's just me editorializing, but holy moly. Medicine was positively medieval in 1928. The doctor continues, "I put a safety pin right through the flesh of her leg on the left side up to the middle, and also this was completely dead. Also the left arm. Another typical thing about hysterical people is that when you put a pin through the flesh, they do not feel it and there is no blood, or there is very little. She also got very excited when she was asked to tell the doctor her life history. She screamed and tried to scratch everybody, her counselor, Judge DeLeggy, and me, and kept crying that she wished she had died when she was shot. Then she'd calm down and smile, which is another thing a malingerer will not do. They overdo the act. Hysterical paralysis is produced by a very severe emotional reaction." Okay, just to clarify, it seems here that the doctor is saying that she was paralyzed because of hysteria, which is an old-fashioned word for madness, essentially, for having lost grip of her reason. I thought he would be testifying that she was paralyzed because of the gunshot wound. That would seem to support the defense's case, and this was in fact a defense witness, but no. He seems to be saying that she lost grip of her reason because of the tragedy of all the events, and that had caused her to become paralyzed. So again, the doctor's testimony finished with, "Hysterical paralysis is produced by a very severe emotional reaction." Mrs. May's tempestuous outbursts, however, had a very bad, or good, depending on which side of the trial you were on, effect on the jury. Time after time, her counsel was obliged to appeal to the court to order her to restrain herself. Wow, her own counsel had to ask the court to order her to restrain herself. She was functionally a hostile witness. However, her rage appeared to be unrestrainable. A smoldering rage, which every now and then burst into flame when a witness for the prosecution said something that displeased her. Adam May, her war veteran husband, had crossed from France to be at her side. He came to court from a hospital at Rutland, Massachusetts at the risk of his own life. "She was more than good to me," he told reporters loyally. "I love her very much." The trial had started on November 30th, and the jury retired at 10 o'clock in the morning of December 13th, 2 weeks later, to consider the verdict. Mrs. May had, in the interim, sneered and screamed herself into the disfavor of everyone except her faithful husband and her loyal friend Leon Kemp. Leon, by the way, which perhaps should be pronounced Leone, I'm not sure, is a woman. Within 5.5 hours, a verdict of guilty of manslaughter in the first degree was brought in. "This verdict, in the opinion of the court, is the correct one," the judge said, addressing the defendant. "You killed Andrew DeVolo while you were in the transport of rage and jealousy. There can be no justification for the crime you committed. I am not unmindful of your physical condition and of the surrounding circumstances which culminated in this unfortunate occurrence." He then sentenced Marlyse May to from 5 to 10 years in the Auburn State Prison for Women. When her war veteran husband heard the verdict, he buried his face in his hands and a convulsive shudder shook his disease-worn body. Marlyse May collapsed into the arms of her attendant and was carried from the courtroom. Subsequently, she was reported to be, quote, doing very well in prison and was a model prisoner. Both the mother and the sweetheart of the dead boy won what they had asked for, justice. The sweetheart, of course, being Marlyse May. I'm not sure that 5 to 10 years is going to satisfy an Italian mother, but that's another ball of wax. What I find a little bit troubling about this story, although I do think that Marlyse May was likely guilty, the DA seemed to feel, and it seemed to be the case, whether it's the jury, the judge, her own attorneys, or reporters, it seemed to be that Marlyse May was convicted more for being an unlikable, strident woman publicly and in court than for the strength of the evidence against her. Even if they reach the right outcome, I'm not sure what it says about our society if a woman's composure is even more damning than the facts against her, especially in the case of murder. But I don't have an answer for you there, and what just kept popping into my head throughout this story was the old Shakespearean quote, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." And it seems that Marlyse May herself would tell you, hell hath no fury like a French woman scorned. So treat your ladies, and apparently especially your French ladies, well. Now, even though the Murderous Marlyse May has come to an end, please don't go anywhere. Today's show has a slightly different format than usual. We're going to move directly from the story to my interview with New York Times bestselling author Richard Kadrey, creator of Sandman Slim, phenomenal writer, one of my personal artistic heroes. It's a very moving conversation for me. It's a very interesting conversation. He's led quite a life. He tells us his own Kinda Murdery story. So stick around and listen to my interview with New York Times best-selling author and creator of Sandman Slim. There's a movie in development, by the way, guys. Richard Kadrey. I have to tell you, I am so excited today because I have the amazing opportunity of interviewing a phenomenal guest. And I'm going to be straight up with you. After 16 years as a Hollywood executive, for the most part, I'm pretty jaded when it comes to getting excited about spending time with other humans just because of who they are or what they do, and not because of the relationship that we've already built together, which is a super wordy, kind of my thing, way of saying I don't get easily starstruck. But there's an exception to every rule, and I am starstruck today because joining me is one of the few artists whose work I eagerly anticipate, like a kid popping the doors on an advent calendar. He's the god of grit, the duke of darkness, the archon of action, the pontiff of pulp, and the maestro of magic. He writes Lucifer DC Comics, and he's the New York Times best-selling author of the Sandman Slim series. Richard Kadrey is here, and I am trying hard not to scream like a 16-year-old girl at a Beatles concert, or is it a 12-year-old girl at a BTS concert? I don't know, but the metaphor's in there somewhere. Hey, Richard, thanks for being here. How are you?
I'm already into this interview, just from the intro. I'm really digging it.
Well, I'm really digging being here with you. And I think, the podcast and any community really is stronger when we're as open and honest with each other as possible. So yeah. I want to be honest with you and honest with the audience that it's my natural inclination when I'm talking to somebody that I admire or look up to, and that's you, as I've just revealed, to want to impress them with how smart I am or how much I know. As I talk about on the show, I was born with cerebral palsy. And while I do think that the impulse to sort of prove that you're worthy or good enough or not broken or whole is something that all humans experience, for me, mine was very much informed by my disability and the feeling that because I was behind the eight ball physically, I needed to make up for that by proving that I was smart. And so every bone in my body wants to spend this interview telling you all the stuff I love about your work or all the things I know and all of my thoughts, but that's not what I actually want to get out of this or hear about. And I don't think it's what the listeners really want either. So I'm going to fight that impulse, and I want to talk to you about you.
Okay, let's go.
All right. Yeah, let's do it. Obviously, you're a New York Times best-selling author, and so you're a very accomplished, excellent writer, and I want to ask you, tell us a little bit about just your natural journey as a writer. How young were you when you first started writing stories? When do you first remember writing your first story?
Really, as far back as I can think, my mother was a writer. She was a local reporter on a Brooklyn newspaper. I mean, a real small thing, but that meant I got to see how writing worked, how she created stories, did interviews, collected other information, and the tools of writing were always around the house. There were piles of pads, different kinds of pens and paper and, highlighters and different kinds of typewriters. And I just became fascinated with the simple tools of writing. And I think I started my first novel when I was 10. I remember that. I don't remember what it was called or anything else. I illustrated the front cover. I remember that. It was set in Egypt. There was an alien invasion of crab people, and they were all holed up in the Sphinx. And that's all I remember.
Did you sort of know you wanted to be a writer from the very start? Because I run into two kinds of writers. I find either that there are people who just knew from the beginning that they were a writer, and that's all they ever wanted to do and all that they do. And then there are those who are writers, but thought they wanted to be something else, an actor, a businessman, who knows? They fought tooth and nail the whole idea of being a writer until they finally had to realize that that's what they were in their bones. What is your experience with that? Did you always know, or did you have to figure it out?
I knew it, but I resisted it for years. I tried a lot of other stuff. Writing, when I started out, of course, I was awful. That's just the way it works as a writer. Very few people start off with the ability to put together a good story, and I couldn't do it for years. And so I went off in other directions. I played music for years. I played in a lot of bands. Later, I made money in photography. But it always came back to writing in the end. It just kept pulling me back. So I was definitely from childhood knew I was going to end up a writer, but then I spent years resisting that until I just couldn't do it anymore.
Was there a moment, like for me, I remember, not to do with writing, but I remember the moment I was about 27 years old. I used to go out and party all the time. Mm-hmm. And my friends and I would always go to the same haunts, kind of like the tiki bar in Sandman Slim. We'd always go to the same bars and we'd always hang out. And there was the regulars, the lurkers and others.
Sure.
And I thought, this is so fun. This is amazing. I'm going to do this forever. And there was one night when I was 27 years old where all of a sudden, I don't know if it was my biological clock or what, but I was like, it's too crowded and loud in here. These people suck. This whole thing sucks and I hate it. And from that moment, like a snap of the fingers, I hated it. So I guess that's a metaphor for what I'm asking is, was there this moment for you where you fully just embraced and knew what you were and who you were going to be as far as being a writer was, or was it gradual and did it sneak up on you?
I think it happened in a moment. I'd been reading science fiction and fantasy, mostly science fiction when I was younger. And I knew a lot of American writers around my age had been to something called the Clarion Workshop. Now, I wasn't writing a lot, but I had one brief encounter with college. I tried to be a student for a while, and it was awful. I never finished my freshman year. It was just, I was not suited for the college. The college was not suited for me. But I was in the English department one day, and there was a big bulletin board, and someone had, thumbtacked information on the Clarion Writers Workshop that year. And what you had to do was write a story, submit it to them, and then they would choose people they thought were good enough, had some raw talent that the workshop could help develop. Basically, I think I stole the flyer. because we didn't have camera phones or anything back then. So I took it home and I wrote a story and sent it in. And, I mean, it was awful. I know in my heart it was awful. But I got in. They chose me. There was something in that crappy story that the judges saw, I guess.
I bet there was, and I bet it wasn't as crappy as your internal critic thinks.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Anyway, I got in. It's a 6-week program, stayed the whole way through, and I have mixed feelings about Clarion now. It helped me in some ways. It helped me develop a critical eye. It helped me skip some mistakes that young writers make, but also it can be destructive, at least back then. I know they've changed a couple of policies since I was a Clarion, but the Clarion I went to had 2 teachers in the last 2 weeks. But the last week was important because after you've written all your stories, you had to write like a story, at least a story a week for 6 weeks. And at the end of that 6 weeks, during the last week, you have a one-on-one walk, like through the grounds of the university, where you talk about your writing, career, whatever, with that teacher. And the teacher told me to quit. I had no talent. Just stop. Go do something else, which didn't affect me because I was an arrogant little prick. But I've talked to other people from around that time, and it hurt a lot of people hearing that kind of stuff. Yeah. That's the part I mean by destructive. They don't do that anymore. They don't allow that kind of death sentence from a teacher.
Especially because obviously that person was wrong.
Well, I've taken a lot of delight in he was wrong. A bunch of my teachers are wrong. I had a lot of teachers. I had a couple who liked my writing, but the majority of them didn't. And I always wondered if that was because they'd give us writing assignments, and I'd sort of halfway do what they wanted, then just added on something weird. Yeah. And so some of the teachers thought that was interesting, and others who just hated me for it.
Well, and, ask anyone who's ever been great at anything from, Tom Brady and Michael Jordan to just about anybody you could name in any discipline, and they'll tell you that proving the haters wrong is one of the strongest motivators for a lot of people. And so it sounds like it motivated you, too.
I actually dedicated one of my books to all the teachers who said, stop writing.
As I mentioned at the top, Richard Kadrey is the New York Times best-selling author of a series called the Sandman Slim series, and it is a series that I absolutely adore. There are 12 books. The way that I would describe it, and Richard, please correct me if I don't do this well, but Sandman Slim is a half angel, half human man who gets sent to hell by his enemies and busts out of hell to wreak revenge upon them. That's the basic moment where the story starts. And he lives in a world that is full of angels and demons and the monsters that we all may know, things like vampires and ghouls, but it's in an urban setting set in Los Angeles. And so it's this cross between epic fantasy and urban hard-boiled detective fiction. And the books are phenomenal. Did I do okay describing what Sandman Slim is, in case anyone doesn't know?
Yeah, that's a good description. Stark is a Nephilim, basically, which, go Google that. Basically, a Nephilim is the product of an angel impregnating a human woman. And there's a lot of religious subtext to Sandman Slim, which comes out of my background. I mean, I was a churchy kid when I was young, and again, being thrown out of things where I was thrown out of college, I was kind of thrown out of church for asking too many questions about the Bible. And so I've always been fascinated by those questions and by the stuff that the sort of powers that be don't want to talk about. So the story of the Nephilim, the story of God and Lucifer, their positions in the hierarchy of spirits, and how they relate to the idea of evil in the real world. If you went to any kind of Christian church, especially when you're a kid, you're given a pretty simplistic view of the world. Then if you actually read some books, or if you actually read the damn Bible, which almost none of the people I went to church with ever did.
They just quote it. They don't read it. Yes.
Yeah, you quote it because that's what the preacher tells you. But they leave out a lot of stuff. And I think the breaking point for me, it came when asking questions about Lucifer. I mean, I've always been fascinated by Lucifer. And then in the Old Testament, discovering that Lucifer was basically the tester for God in the book of Job. You have him endlessly fucking with Job, but it's part of God's plan.
Right.
Which we're not supposed to talk about. So Lucifer is basically not God's hitman, but, the jerk who does God's worst jobs for him. And then he gets developed by the church into the big horned monster we are told to fear because it's a great control system.
I have to say, for myself personally, and maybe I would have figured it out on my own if I'd actually read the Bible cover to cover, I was raised nominally Catholic as well, and I'm very much fascinated by and love the stakes and the bombastic, epic nature of that whole ethos. And I think that's part of why I love the angels and demons aspect and the God aspect in the Sandman Slim books. But for me, it was actually your Lucifer character, Samael, in Sandman Slim, who helped me to clarify some of my own spiritual beliefs. Now, I usually don't talk about religion for obvious reasons on the show.
Yeah.
And I want to say at the outset that I have nothing but the utmost respect for everyone and whatever they may believe. For myself personally, the thing that always kind of bothered me from a logical standpoint was the idea that an all-powerful, omnipotent, omniscient being like God himself could have anything close to an equal rival. The idea that the devil was the adversary and that there was some push and pull between God and the devil where one of them or the other was always just barely winning the tug-of-war didn't make any sense to me. But I didn't articulate it even in my own head very well. And then I started reading Sandman Slim and discovered what you've just stated so beautifully, which is essentially the devil is God's most trusted angel, the only one that he trusts enough to give the shit jobs to. And that really clicked for me. Oh, wait, he is strong enough and worthy enough to actually be able to bear the burdens of being the enemy because we must have one. That idea was like a puzzle piece falling into place for me, and that's one thing that I love about the books.
Well, that's nice to hear, because for all the bluster and punching and gunfights and all the rest of it in the book, I actually was hoping some people would kind of ask questions like that, because I was, like I said, I was presenting a lot of stuff. I'd done a lot of research and my own background just in life. I actually kind of wanted to pose some weird little questions, not in any kind of bombastic way, just a sort of subtext in there. Another aspect of Lucifer that was important to me in the Sandman Slim books was that he's also kind of a brat. He has some power. He knows on some level that he's daddy's favorite. And because of that, I guess, I don't know, I never thought of this before. Maybe like me, he asks questions he's not supposed to ask. And this has been used in a lot of work now. So it's not going to sound so revolutionary. But basically, my Samael was really into free will. It's like, well, God, you've given humans free will. Why can't we have them? Basically, we're slaves. We, being the angels, are a slave class. And how can you justify that? And that's the the original war in heaven, right? Was basically, in a way, a kind of slave rebellion, at least in their eyes.
It seems that the obvious answer from God to Samael in that, when that question is posed, would be, well, you all are just way too powerful to be running around doing whatever you want. Do you think that the answer is as simple as that, or is there more to it, and if so, why?
I think there's more to it. I think now you're getting into the question of what is a deity. And in the Sandman Slim universe, God did create the angels. In the Sandman Slim universe, God is a bit of a fuck-up. I used some... I stole some Gnosticism here. God's a fuck-up. Basically, about halfway through the series, Stark realizes that God isn't what he'd been taught or what he believed. That, in fact, God is, in his mind, kind of the janitor of the universe, not the thing that built it, not the thing that runs it, but just kind of this guy who kind of sweeps up at night. And he's right and he's wrong. Without giving out spoilers, in the end, God is God. But God isn't the God that we're taught or we think about.
I want to talk a little bit about my experience encountering the Sandman Slim stories and how I perceive both your world and your writing and what I love about it and some things that I wonder. So obviously, as I've stated almost ad nauseum here, I love Sandman Slim and the world. And I think that's because, in part, that it revolves around the humanity of monsters and the monstrosity of humans. And that really resonates with me, and I'm sure it does with a lot of people in a lot of ways. I think, again, for me to go back to my disability, my cerebral palsy, when you have this deep, inveterate sense that there is something fundamentally wrong with you, it becomes really important to show that that either is not wrong, is not actually a less than, it can be an asset, or that you are, despite this intrinsic failing, still very much worthwhile. And that is what I think that is why, if I'm pop psychologizing myself, that your stories resonate with me so deeply, because all of these outcasts are incredibly worthwhile, have all these redeeming qualities, and are very much better beings than those who seem to have nothing wrong with them. Am I on point with that theme? And if I am, where in your life do you feel like that need to express those kind of ideas came from?
Guillermo del Toro really articulated this well, and of course I can't quote him verbatim. But basically, I've always been very comfortable with monsters. I always thought the idea of monstrosity and fearful beings, things that were rejected by normal society, were basically my neighbors. I live with monsters. I don't trust intrinsically the good people, the people who are put up as our role models. When I was younger in Texas and in LA later, I had dual lives. I realized that there were nice people in the world with nice straight jobs and nice straight lives, and I had them as friends. But then I had the crazy people and the drug dealers, the weird musicians and artists, prostitutes, pimps when I was a kid in Texas. And I realized I couldn't mix. It took me a while to realize when I was young, you can't mix those worlds. So I sort of hung out with both of those groups when I was growing up. And I had friends in the straight world, but I was more comfortable with the people I knew at night. And those were the musicians, the artists, the prostitutes, and thieves of all kinds.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me as well. I grew up in Humboldt County in a time when weed was legal nowhere. I grew up off the power grid, all wood, cooking wood, heating, solar and water power, hour from town. And I was a bright kid and had a life that was very straight and etc., kind of as you described. But then at the same time, when you have a completely illegal, and this was back when the black helicopters were flying all the time, economic engine that's worth $1.5 billion a year, a lot of the pillars of your community might actually be backwoods drug lords.
Yeah.
And also the pillar of the community and a good person, and that's not necessarily mutually exclusive. And so I had a similar experience of feeling like I knew a lot of people who were just regular good people, and then I had friends that were really close to the edge in all kinds of ways. And that feeling of living between two worlds, I mean, now that you've said it, I think that also describes even the physiology of Sandman Slim James Stark, right? As a Nephilim. He's literally between two worlds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He has that human connection, but he's never far from hell.
Right.
And the Hellion world that he spent all those years in. He's definitely living in two worlds at the same time, trying to keep them separate. But of course they keep bumping into each other, and he's constantly moving at different points, constantly moving from our world back to hell and then back to our world again through various means. And he never particularly likes it. He hates, I mean, it should be said about the series that in the first book, when Stark escapes hell and is looking for revenge, to my mind, he is clinically insane. Mm-hmm. He has spent 11 years in hell, being tortured, being thrown into an arena, being forced to fight, demons, other human souls, monsters of various kinds. When he gets back to Earth, he is a time bomb. He is instantly violent at the slightest provocation, because that's what he's learned over all those years in hell. That's his survival mode. And the series over those 12 books is about the rehabilitation of a monster. Mm. So that first book, he comes back to the world wanting revenge on the people who sent him to hell. But in a way, he wants revenge on the world and God and the angels for leaving him there, for letting this happen and ignoring him.
Father, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who was not slated to go to hell, at that moment at least, he was dragged there. obviously against his will, but he was not dead. He was actually alive in hell. He's the first, I suppose, since depending on which theology you're talking about,
sure.
Christ was the only other living person in hell at one point, briefly. But so he would be the second living person in hell. So he spent 11 years being beaten up as a living human being. He escapes and he wants revenge on the people who sent him there, but he wants revenge on the world. And kind of in the back of his mind is, I want to kill these people, but if I destroy the world along the way, cool.
Right. Yeah. Some men just want to watch the world burn. Yeah.
Exactly. And the course of those 12 books, he completely rejects humanity for most of the first book. And I wanted to slowly trick him into becoming more human over the course of those books in the way that life kind of tricks you into not being the selfish brat you were when you were a little kid. I mean,
and by that you mean
little bitty kids, everything is about them. And then as you grow up, you learn that there are other people in the world and you have to share and have empathy. So I wanted Stark to have to go through that also. It's interesting. I'm not huge into superhero movies. I sort of dabble in them, but I saw the new The Batman with Robert Pattinson. And I actually liked it because unlike the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, this to me felt like a 50s crime story. It was grubby. It was little people doing terrible things, trying to be bigger people. And Batman is nothing but fail and is pissed off all the time and is just a mess.
Yeah.
And getting someone like Pattinson to play him as a younger mess, I really enjoyed, because that makes more sense to me as someone who's, going to go out there and change the world, but is so screwed up himself that he's just going to go out there and become part of it. So I really enjoyed what to me felt like a grubby, sweaty, dirty Batman.
And so do you feel that the Batman from the Batman, Pattinson's Batman, is something of a Stark-like character in his desire to do right while being so screwed up himself that it makes it difficult to stay on track? Is there an analog there?
Absolutely. I think they have some stuff in common there that they both have a lot of crap in their head they have to overcome.
There is a Sandman Slim movie on the horizon. Is that correct?
Yeah, there is. It's in development right now. And there's very little I can say about it. It's at that weird Hollywood stage. Hollywood thinks it's the CIA. Everything is a secret.
You are
until it's not. They really control their information. So I can't say much about it other than, yes, it's under development and things are happening. So
I know you said you can't say much of anything. Is there anything you can tell us?
There are interesting people attached, a lot of interesting possibilities, but I just can't say anything more right now.
Understood. Absolutely. I've talked a lot about why I love Sandman Slim and your writing, and I also want to talk about a little bit why I think it's important, why I think it's an important work. When I first reached out to you about coming on the show, I replied on Twitter to something that you had tweeted. And I think I said something like, I just want to let you know that your books, Sandman Slim in particular, have meant a lot to me and helped me through some dark times in my life. And that's true. And for me, I think the reason that is, and the reason I think the work is important, is you, without preaching or sacrificing entertainment value, because I never want to be told what I need to do to make myself better.
Yeah.
There's nothing more obnoxious to me than inspirational quotes. I feel like people are looking down on me and telling me, you're just not mentally strong enough to fix yourself, you weakling. Well, that's what I hear when they're like, it's all up to you. Attitude is everything. Everything you see on those freaking corporate office posters and all over Facebook and Twitter. I hate that. I hate that. And what without doing that, without preaching or sacrificing entertainment value, I feel like you communicate with such clarity that it's okay. Excuse me, I'm actually getting choked up here. It's okay to...
Take your time, man. Take your time.
I did a whole course of hypnotherapy. And basically the way that works is you talk about something that is bothering you, went wrong in your life or whatever, and you don't get hypnotized like they put you completely under and make you act like a chicken. But the therapist will ask you, well, why do you think that is? And what happens, it's like peeling an onion. You keep giving answers. You keep giving answers and giving answers. And it's always the wrong answer because it's all the lies you've told yourself. And eventually you give the right answer, the real answer. And when you do, you just cry. And I hated it so much because it was such hard work. But I think what happened to me just now is I didn't really realize fully until I started trying to tell you what it really was that is the reason that your books mean so much to me. And that's why I got so choked up. And what it is that it's okay to not be okay, but even if you're broken, even if you're a monster, not only are you worthwhile, but you can still do good. You can still be the hero. And I think that message, for all kinds of reasons, but just has meant so much to me at various points in my life. So I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you for telling me that. Yeah, I absolutely believe that. I absolutely believe that I think the monsters out there absolutely can do great work. And I think in some ways, again, this is sort of getting back to Guillermo del Toro's idea about monsters. I think in some way, the monsters can be seen as better than the regular straight world because kind of like the monsters have less to hide. Monsters are monsters. It's like, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, any of them. It's just like, can't really hide this.
Right.
It's like, I'm kind of this thing, and I'm just going to go out there and try to live a life and try not to screw things up too much. But I probably will along the way at points, but I'm doing my best.
Yeah.
I'm doing my best. And you people aren't any better than me when you get right down to it.
Yeah. You had said earlier how you don't really trust nice people or what have you. I'm paraphrasing, and I'm exactly the same. My dad told me once, and I don't know if he said this first or if he was paraphrasing someone else, but he said something like, never trust a man who doesn't drink beer. Now, of course he didn't mean that literally. Of course, I'm not encouraging alcoholics to run out and start drinking. But what he meant was, if you can't see somebody's vices, then they're hiding something a whole lot worse than what you can see in others. Is the basic premise. Yeah. And I've always felt like that was true. When I meet people that are just so pitch perfect and everybody loves them, I'm like, what is going on here?
Oh, yeah. The level of control it takes to be that perfect person is something I don't trust. I don't trust those people, the perfect people out there in the world, the successful, perfect models we're supposed to follow. Don't trust them at all. Don't trust them. I'm sure there are genuinely good people in those positions, but until they show me the cracks in the facade, I'm not going to trust them.
Yeah.
You got to show me the, I believe in Japan, it's a flaw in the piece of art. I believe the word is wabi. Mm-hmm. And it's a good thing, the flaw, because it shows you that this piece of art was created by a human. And I want to see the wabi in people. Yes.
That's wonderful. Richard, you've already either told us directly or alluded to some pretty incredible stories and relationships from your own life. One of the things I like to do here on Kinda Murdery when I have a guest like yourself is to ask them if they have any Kinda Murdery stories from their own life that they could share with the audience. And so do you have a Kinda Murdery story you could tell us?
Yeah, I'm 99% sure the statute of limitations is run out on this one. It's kind of murdery in the sense that I guess all of us could have been shot for doing this. Luckily, we got away with everything. But 30 plus years ago, I was in Paris at Christmas with an old girlfriend, staying at a weird little hotel near Notre Dame. The Hotel Esmeralda, which is also near Shakespeare and Company. There you go. One night, it was right at, I think it was Christmas Eve, in fact. We were hanging out. We had food in our room. We really didn't want to go out to dinner. We thought we were going to go do it, changed our mind. And at one point, my girlfriend and I ended up in the lobby with the night clerk.
Wow.
Who turned out to be, I don't remember his name, he was a Peruvian philosophy professor who had emigrated to France and was sort of working his way up.
3 Ps. Peruvian philosophy professor, 3 Ps.
There you go. And when we talked to him for a while and was like, oh, it's your first time in Paris at Christmas. I'm going to show you around. He just basically shut the place down. We got in his car, drove all around Paris for a long time. The murdery part of the story is he drove us to Versailles, which is, of course, closed. It's Christmas Eve. We walked around the outside. Someone had left a door open.
No.
We fucking snuck into Versailles, midnight on Christmas Eve, and it was full of fog, and it was right out of not a horror movie, it's more of a spooky movie. So things were swallowed by the fog, and as you walked through, they would slowly come into view through the fog.
The building itself was inside was full of fog.
Just on the edges, mostly the cool fog part was in the gardens. So we walked around. This is all pre 9/11, by the way.
Right, of course.
And so we hung out there for a while. We walked around. We were very quiet because we noticed that as we came in, there was a guard station 20 yards away. We were real quiet, but all the guards were in there drinking. It was Christmas Eve. They didn't fucking care. So
that's amazing.
So we were there for a while, and then we decided, okay, we've sort of pressed our luck. Let's get out of here. We go back to the fence where the door was. It's locked.
Oh no!
And the guardhouse is there. We can hear voices and all kinds of stuff going on. It's like we do. So we got the hell away from there, walked way down the wall, and basically it's like, this is a stone wall, and it was just like, oh, we're climbing.
Right. What are you gonna do?
What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? So we basically crawled up this wall,
and you were able to do that. Like find handholds and footholds.
It was craggy enough. We made it up there. Yeah. Made it over, dropped down on the other side, hoping we didn't, sprain something or break an ankle.
How tall was the wall, you say?
10, 12 feet. I don't remember saying. It was high enough that it was daunting to climb, and then high enough that when we got to the other side, it's like, well, like I said, when you had to drop down, I hope it wasn't so far that you were going to break something.
Right.
But everyone got through it. We ran back to the car, got the hell out of there.
Oh my God.
And got away with it, Yeah. We were not shot for being perhaps terrorists.
Right.
That was sort of looking back. It's like, oh, that's sort of the downside of doing something like that, and the murdery part of it.
Right.
But yeah, we got to spend some time in Versailles, just sort of one-on-one with the place.
That's amazing.
On Christmas Eve, which was just sort of extra special.
I'm sure everybody's dying to know what's next for you. What's next for Richard Kadrey? What's in the hopper? What's coming up? You got it.
I am rewriting a novella right now. Let's see. Can I talk about the Pale House Devil will be coming out sometime next year. I have written a horror novel with Cassandra Caw that will be out next year. It's called The Dead Take the A Train.
Oh, I love it.
And I have another secret book coming out next year that I don't think I can quite talk about yet. But there'll be more stuff next year. And there are some Sandman Slim stories, short stories coming.
And like every rock star, I'm hoping that you change your mind and bring him back for real in novels.
Well, we'll see. I think I need a break from Stark. I think the world needs a break from Stark. You don't want to be the last guy at the party.
I hear you. I hear you.
So I wanted to end the book there. If something brilliant occurs to me later, maybe I'll say. I never want to say absolutely no to anything.
Richard, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the wonderful stories you've shared, the insights, the inside look at a craft at which you are a master. I can't tell you how much I appreciate having you here on the show. Thank you. And for Richard Kadrey, I'm Zevon Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery. If you've enjoyed today's Kinda Murdery, please tell your friends and family, tell strangers, leave a review. It's the best way to ensure that I can keep telling that special brand of bizarre and terrible tales that you'll only find here on Kinda Murdery.